President, thank you. And I thank the great senator from Washington State for her leadership on this incredibly important issue. If this tax bill weren't terrible enough, it goes after one of the most beautiful places on Earth, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. But drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is nothing more than a big oil polar payout. This isn't about drilling for oil. It's about drilling for votes. This isn't about crude oil. It's the crudest of politics. We now have 41 co-sponsors of my legislation with Senator Bennett to permanently protect the Arctic Refuge by designating it as a wilderness. That is enough to sustain a filibuster. And that is precisely why they are circumventing the normal legislative process by including it as a rider on a tax bill. In reality, drilling would turn this pristine wilderness into an industrialized wasteland. The coastal plain is the biological heart of the Arctic Refuge. And allowing oil and gas drilling would drive a stake right through the heart of it. We're currently sending nearly 1 million barrels of oil a day of American crude oil overseas. But Republicans and their oil industry allies are saying that we need to allow drilling in the wildest place left in America so that we can export even more oil to China and other foreign nations. It's an abomination. It's a disgrace. Drilling in a wilderness area in order to send oil to China? It's a disgrace. And if the Republicans persist in passing this monstrosity of a tax bill and pass this big oil polar payout, they're the ones who are going to be left out in the cold in 2018. If the Republicans want to see what real wilderness looks like, they don't need to travel to the Arctic Refuge. The wilderness is about to come to them. They're about to be sent deep into the political wilderness if they pass this tax scam legislation. If the Republicans are successful in ramming through the Arctic drilling rider in the dead of night, we will never give up. We will keep fighting because the Arctic Refuge should forever be the home of caribou, not crude, bears, not barrels of oil, sandpipers, not pipelines. We will never stop fighting. They may win tonight in the dark of night, but this fight is not over. This is a crime against the environment which is being committed here tonight. We do not have to sacrifice this wilderness. We are exporting oil out of our country, exporting it. We don't have to go here. Export more oil, and that's where it's going? It's just wrong. And just remember that this is all a part of the so-called Republican reconciliation process. And now that we have the final product, that process is being exposed as the giant con game that it truly is. The key phrase in reconciliation is con. It's a con job. The whole thing is nothing more than a masquerade, a Trojan horse, in order to get a tax break for the upper 1 percentile. It's a con job. But the polling in our country says the American people are not buying it. They're seeing right through it, through all the political noise, all of the incredible distractions, all the red herrings. The American public knows that this is a tax break for the wealthiest people in our country and not for the middle class. Republicans are not even trying to hide what they are doing anymore. They are moving ahead with reckless speed to pass this disaster of a bill in the middle of the night. So that is why we will all be back here in a few hours, yet again voting in the dead of night on a 500-page bill that has no hearings, no amendments, no real debate, because that's the only way you can get a tax break for the upper 1 percentile in the wealthiest corporations in the country, while trying to market it as a tax break for the middle class, when they know it is not. They know it, by the way. They know what they are doing. It is the height of irony that we will be here tonight ramming through legislation before the senator-elect from the state of Alabama can be seated. Just 8 years ago, Republicans called on Democrats to step up and repeal the Affordable Care Act until Senator Scott Brown was sworn in. They said at the time, stop progress, don't do anything. We need to wait for Scott Brown to show up. But then, when Doug Jones gets elected, it's just put your foot to the accelerator, move as fast as you can, no hearings, no anything. And Alabama will not be represented with their new senator out here. Back then, Democrats actually listened to those calls, and today our concerns are completely ignored by the Republicans, all so that they can continue playing their con game on the American people. And the American people are waking up to the fact that they have been sold a bill of goods. They are seeing that this plan is simply a Trojan horse of giveaways to the wealthy, the corporations, and Republican political donors. What are some of those giveaways? Well, front and center is the massive cut in tax rates for mega corporations. We know this won't create jobs or trickle down to their employees because we've tried it before. In 2004, we gave a massive tax holiday for huge corporations on the money that they held overseas. But the 15 companies that benefited the most from those giveaways cut more than 20,000 jobs and decreased their research spending. Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does tend to rhyme. And this bill rhymes with that 2004 bill. The tax cut in this bill is even more egregious. Corporate tax cuts flow to CEOs and share stockholders. And those stockholders are not all American taxpayers. Foreigners hold 35% of U.S. corporate stock. Foreigners. That means that the Republican tax is a giveaway of $48 billion to foreigners in 2019 alone. So think about this. The Republicans can find $48 billion to give away to foreign shareholders, but in the same bill, raise taxes on millions of middle-class families. By 2027, this bill will raise taxes on over 53% of American households. And at the same time, a full 83% of the tax cuts will flow to the top 1% of Americans. So the more the American people see what is in this bill, the more they realize that they will have to foot the bill. The American people are saying, no way. New polls today show that over half of the American public opposes this bill. 2/3 of the people recognize that the bill will benefit the wealthy over the middle class. And according to the polls, the only thing more unpopular than this tax plan is President Trump himself. But the Republicans will push ahead anyways, since this is all part of the bigger con game. Because when these tax giveaways pass, the deficit will explode by over $2 trillion. And Republicans aren't even waiting for those deficits to become reality before using them as an excuse to move to the next phase of the con game. They're already using future deficits to justify a brutal, vicious cut to programs for the poorest, for the sickest, for the neediest people in our country. Earlier this month, Speaker Ryan said, quote, we're going to have to get back next year at entitlement reform, which is how you tackle the debt and the deficit. We know exactly what Republicans mean when they talk about entitlement reform. They mean taking a machete to the programs that working and middle-class families in America rely upon. Republicans want nothing more than an excuse to slash Medicare and make it harder for grandma to buy her medicine. To gut Medicaid, because, in their opinion, health care is only a right for the wealthy. And they cover their historical enmity towards Social Security so that they can steal benefits from every American who has paid into that system. They're doing this because the modern Republican Party has a sacred obligation to their donors, to the Koch brothers, to the massive corporations that help fund their campaigns. They promise them tax breaks, and it will be average working families who will end up footing the bill. And when the bill becomes due, the American people will not forget who sent it to them. Mr. President, here we are at the end of the year. We have truly important issues to address. We need to fund health care for 9 million children, ensure that community health centers can keep the lights on, secure the dreams of 800,000 young dreamers, and combat the crisis that American communities face from opioids and natural disasters. But sadly, we are doing none of those things. Instead, we are looting America's middle class to give away massive amounts of money to the rich, which will then create deficits, which will then have them going after Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, grandma and grandpa who built this country. That's always been their plan. They have an ancient animosity towards all of these programs. And now they believe that they can leave them as debt-soaked relics of what they are today by creating this huge debt in this tax bill and then turning on the very programs for the very people who made this country who we are today. Mr. President, I urge a no vote on this bill. It will go down in history as one of the worst single pieces of legislation ever to be considered by the United States Senate.